We're all villains in someone's story. I know I am, and I assure you that you are as well. And this isn't the deeper realization that rose to surface as I introspected my way through this video, nor is it a striking epiphany. It is common knowledge. Everyone has at some point rejected another person, or ignored them, broke their heart, said something they should not have said, and we are aware of that. We are unwillingly the embodiment of yin and yang, which is an ancient Chinese philosophy concept that pretty much explains our grey vision of the world and how the good and bad will forever coexist, regardless of the common belief or need for two opposing forces. But that's not how it works. The balance is not the goodness, it's the in-between. And as we look at these villains, that's what we hope for. We await their regression to the mean. This also explains why good characters that behave perfectly can sometimes be disliked. They are exceedingly good. They are lingering in the polar opposite of bad, which perhaps makes them boring and unrealistic. Their actions and whole demeanor become too predictable.
Perhaps that's why Captain America is my least favorite Avenger. He's too righteous and stuck up at times. Especially in the beginning when he would take things too seriously. Also, he wouldn't joke, he wouldn't swear. Also, I did put up Rory Gilmore's picture for a reason. She represents a counterexample. Her character in Gilmore Girls was seemingly so perfect that the writers had to completely change her personality halfway through the show, in an attempt to make her relatable.
They had created this character who was like so seemingly perfect that they had to like throw something at her, but I think we overcorrected. Clearly we overcorrected. Right?
This ended up annoying the viewers who were less than impressed with the good girl gone bad act, and to this day, she still scores high up in those worst main characters lists. Villains, on the other hand, are proactive. They initiate the events that make the movies or TV shows exciting to begin with. They have a much darker and complex background, which adds an element of intrigue to their personality, making them somewhat more special and interesting. When an antagonist does something good, or a series of good things, viewers grow fond of them. Those deeds contribute to their character development, and add layers and dimensions to who they are. So unlike protagonists, when they go out of character, they are praised for it. Jaimie Lannister and Theon Greyjoy are good examples. Their introductions to the show were far from pleasant, with Jaimie crippling a child and Theon betraying the family that raised him. But the changes that were introduced to their personalities later on shifted the whole narrative, and helped them win over the viewers.
You're a good man.
Another example of a villain that quickly won people over is the Joker. He appeared in the second highest grossing Batman movie, and his own standalone movie broke the record for the highest grossing R-rated movie ever. So why do we like him so much? Unlike Batman's original story that's pretty much known by everyone at this point, there's so much mystery surrounding the Joker, starting with his name. Though the latest movie had him named Arthur Fleck, his character went by different names in almost every rendition: Jack Napier, Jerome Valeska, or even Martha Wayne. His impulsivity and nonchalance are very liberating. He represents the part of us that's frustrated with the restriction of morality and etiquette, our secret desire to reject social conventions, the pure freedom we wished we had, and the stand we wish we could take against social hypocrisy. Let's take this quote as an example.
See, their morals, their code, it's a bad joke. Dropped at the first sign of trouble. They're only as good as the world allows them to be. I'll show you. When the chips are down, these civilized people, they'll eat each other. See, I'm not a monster. I'm just ahead of the curve.
Here, the Joker criticizes the way people are quick to judge those who stray away from what is generally deemed as the norm. Yet when the comfort and order they're used to are taken away from them, they are first to dismiss those rules and regulations, especially if it aligns with their interests or if it personally benefits them. The Joker then morphs into a vigilante of some sort, who primarily fights the cynic duality of human behavior, the desire and ability to appear moral while simultaneously avoiding the responsibility of being one. And so, the lack of integrity he claims to be actively fighting becomes the enemy, not him. This eventually turned him into an anti-hero. The 2019 Joker movie made sure we viewed him as a victim of circumstance. It assured us that his descendance to madness was the product of social injustice, coupled with an overwhelming amount of repressed pain and suffering. But before we dive into the story of another villain, let's first figure out the differences between a villain and an anti-hero. A villain alludes to the existence of a hero, a good guy that's there to conquer whatever problems that same villain initiates. the story is usually not told from their perspective, and they're only there to thicken the plot. Most of the time, viewers don't grow deeply attached to them, and don't agree with their reasoning, since their motives are mainly impure and destructive. Anti-heroes, though, are harder to categorize. They don't fit into the archetypal good versus evil dichotomy. They are protagonists who lack the conventional qualities of traditional heroes, such as nobility, honesty, or idealism. Most of them do questionable things, but have redeeming qualities, and somewhat of a moral code, good intentions, or a positive long-term goal. They have reasons for behaving the way they do, an anti-personality disorder like Sherlock, or a traumatic childhood like Joe Goldberg. And just like the Joker, sometimes villains jump from one category to another. Loki is an anti-hero in Thor, yet he is a villain in the Avengers, and so is Klaus in the originals and the Vampire Diaries respectively. Sometimes the lines are even more blurred, like in the case of Euphoria's Nate Jacobs, who's a twisted teenager that basically plays the cards he was dealt. His warped relationship with his own sexuality and anger issues were caused by his own upbringing and unresolved traumas. The gravity of the harm he's caused cannot be easily condoned, but he is pitied more than he is hated, due to the manner in which he was raised. Nevertheless, there's a different kind of villains more deserving of pity, those who were bound by necessity, or those that most might agree have the best intentions at heart. MCU's Thanos, with the help of the Infinity Stones, committed mass genocide by eliminating half of the world's population. However, he did that with a genuine belief that it was a necessary step to bring stability to the universe. And Walter White's diagnosis with terminal cancer led him to use his chemistry knowledge to cook and sell crystal meth. He initially did that because he believed it was the sole and fastest way to provide for his family before his imminent death. But one of my favorite morally ambiguous villains is Black Panther's Erik Killmonger. Killmonger's objective is world domination. He wants to build a new world order, with him reigning over it, possibly in a form of hegemony. Yet, he isn't just doing it to fulfill an inherent need for power. One of his prime goals is to liberate black people all over the world. We live in a day and age where systematic racism is still deeply embedded within society, where slavery reparations or economic compensation for the African American descendants of slaves is a hot topic thrown in political debates, rather than a given right. Especially when centuries of slavery and colonialism have hindered the economic prosperity and stability of African communities. So when you look at it from that perspective, Killmonger's actions don't seem so bad now, do they? Especially when popular figures during the civil rights movement, such as Malcolm X, declared racial separatism as the best approach to the problems facing Black America. So what seems valid to some is seen as extremism by others. But what about those with an unjustifiable contact? Growing up, I used to be interested in reading about serial killers. Not because I particularly liked them or because I didn't fully comprehend the gravity of their actions, but rather because their abnormality fascinated me. I liked picking them apart and figure out their rationale, trying to distinguish which exact moment or incident made them the way they are. It was my little attempt to rationalize the irrational in a way. And I guess that influenced my relationship with well-developed villains. Because even if a part of you hates them for what they did or are doing, the other parts simply understand them. Hannibal Lecter, a character so loved that it has 5 different movie or TV show portrayals so far. He is a murderer and a cannibal, but the gruesome side of him is overwhelmingly enfeebled by his intelligence, sophistication, and charm. Similarly, Dexter is also a serial killer, but one with a rather murky moral code. His eye-for-an-eye approach to manage his compulsions and his tendency to exclusively kill serial killers absolves him of murder in the eyes of some. Both of them have what is called a Freudian excuse, a reason that might shed light as to why they behave the way they do. The two of them have seen family members killed in front of them as children. That kind of insurmountable trauma becomes the driving force behind what they do for the rest of their lives, and their villainy is instantly dwarfed when the whole picture is taken into account. This doesn't mean that all is forgiven in fictional settings. In fact, there is a demarcation that separates the bad from the abhorrently bad, one that is called the moral event horizon, which circles around a metaphorical black hole that, once the character crosses, there is no turning back for him. In simple words, the moral event horizon refers to an action committed by a villain that is so wicked that it immediately classifies them as irredeemably evil, forcing the audience to lose all sympathy for that person. Wait a second, there is one last thing I haven't discussed yet. Female villains who are more celebrated due to their scarcity. Perhaps one of the first popular quote-unquote female villains is Wilkes, who's an obsessive nurse with psychopathic traits and sadomasochistic features, and who ends up killing around 70 people at different stages in her life, and for differing reasons. What made her particularly iconic is that around that time, women were rarely ever perceived as predators. On the contrary, they're usually the ones on the receiving end of violence. So when the exception to the de facto set rules occurred, a new reality was set forth. bringing a twisted version of feminism with it, and a halt to the constant victimization of women in the entertainment industry. It asserted that men and women can be equally horrible at times, that women were capable of sinister things as well. Don't get me wrong, female villains have still suffered from sexism beyond that point. Their characterization is usually restricted by their womanhood itself. A woman scorned, desperately seeking the affection of the male lead. A jealous woman, resenting another for possessing a physical attractiveness level far more superior than hers. Or the femme fatale trope, who use their sexuality as currency. And there is exactly why pure sociopaths like Eve Pilastri or Cersei Lannister represent a breath of fresh air. They are murderous, self-serving individuals who prioritize their own needs above everyone else's, and who have little to no regard to human life. We hate them at times, yet are aware that the shows would be nothing without them. There is also Hela, the goddess of death, who possesses Loki's egomania, Thor's penchant for war, and the ambition of both. And DC's villainous trio, Catwoman, Poison Ivy, and Harley Quinn, who are considered amongst the best comic book villains of all time. Ultimately, our main excuse for loving all sorts of villains, in both genders, rests in our ability to find ways to dissociate our reality from theirs, while still finding common denominators that would connect our life experience to theirs.